Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Abram Kielsmeyer-Jones. We are talking about Advent today, and we're going to look at some accordance-specific ways to study Advent, to read about it, to think about it. So I'm glad that you're here today. Thanks for being here. There's a handout that's available to you in the GoToWebinar control panel. That control panel is what you ought to have seen as soon as you click the registration link, and it's 2 pages. I'm showing it on my screen here. Let me know if you can't hear me or see my screen, but thanks for the confirmation already that audio and video are good. So I'll assume that everything is good tech-wise. There is a questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel, which is like a one-way typed chat. You can type comments or questions there, and I'll see them. And if they're for the group, I'll ask them and respond to them publicly. I may reply privately if that makes more sense. But any and all questions and comments are welcome. So let's orient ourselves a little bit. The description for the webinar says this: the season of Advent looks back to the first coming of Jesus Christ and looks ahead to Christ's return, the second coming. So we are going to do an overview of Advent with special emphasis on how to use accordance to research Advent, Advent-specific resources that are available in accordance, and then we'll spend some time studying Advent-related Bible passages in accordance. So that's starting less from a thematic standpoint and more from a particular Bible passage. And of course, all of these approaches work together and inform each other. So we'll talk about ways to tie them together. But those are the 3 kind of broad areas, is that we'll talk about Advent as a topic and how you might use accordance to do a topic search. We'll look at some resources, and then we'll do how would you kind of get yourself set up for studying Advent-themed Bible passages. I think that covers it for logistics. I should also just note that we're recording today's session, so you will receive a link to the recording and an attachment of the handout. So if you don't download it now, you'll get it later. If you are watching this on a recording and want the handout, you can email me. My email address is right here, abramkj@accordancebible.com. All right, well, let's start with what is Advent. And this definition comes from the Pocket Theological Terms Dictionary, which I've highlighted here. In fact, I can just open this in accordance. Often my initial kind of definitional searches begin, we'll talk about how to use the research search, but they often begin with going to the library and typing in the word pocket, because that will take me to my collection of pocket dictionaries. There are more than what I'm showing here, but there's a handful of these, and they're themed according to different kind of broad topics. So we've got a church history pocket dictionary. There's one on ethics, one on Hebrew, one on New Testament Greek. I will often use that for the translation notes webinars I teach. And then there's one Pocket Theological Terms Dictionary. That is where I would start for something like Advent, which is what I'll do right now. And I've put that definition there in your handout in case you don't have it. Also hyperlink to it. This, I believe, and this is not a sales webinar, but I did note this today as I was preparing. This is on sale right now for $2.99. Easily worth the full price and definitely the sale price. So that link is in your handout. But I would start my search by going to the library, typing in Pocket, theological terms, go to entry and type in Advent, and that takes me right there. So I can make this font bigger, and this is just what is in your handout already. So I'll read this. I think this can kind of orient us to what we talk about when we say Advent. Literally meaning coming or arrival, the dictionary says. This term refers to the coming of Jesus Christ to earth to provide salvation by his life, death, resurrection, and ascension. Period. Although I would actually put a semicolon there because that's just part of it. Christians now anticipate a second advent when Christ will return to earth in bodily form to receive the church and to judge the nations. The term advent also, so this is like a third kind of advent explanation here, the first being the first coming, the second being the second coming. The term advent also refers to a season of the church year during which the church prepares to commemorate Christ's first coming to earth, Christmas. And I would add, and second coming. I think this kind of tilts more toward the first coming, but the Advent season, it says, encompasses the 4 Sundays prior to Christmas Day. And then see also parousia, which is the Greek word for the second coming. You can see that by hovering over this and seeing it in the instant details, or you can click over here and see that. So in this definition, you've got the sort of 2 comings of Christ mentioned here. The initial one, the incarnation, and then the second coming called here the parousia. And then there's a note here that this has specifically to do, or could have to do, with Advent, capital A, as a season of the church year, which leads up to Christmas. So I think that's a pretty good starting point for what Advent is. Let me know if you have questions or comments about that. Certainly, you could look at this in a more robust dictionary. In fact, I think one of the interesting questions about Advent, and I don't know how much we'll get into this today, but to the extent that Advent commemorates one coming of Jesus and looks forward to another, which of the 2 ought we to emphasize more in our own study and devotion, or is it a both and, or how are the 2 comings interrelated? Those are really interesting questions that we can think about. I do think as you go deeper into theological resources and church traditions that observe Advent, you will find voices saying, yes, it is very much about the first coming, but we must not stop there because the story is not over. So that's just sort of an interesting dynamic or question to think about as we study Advent, is kind of these 2 different Advents, these 2 comings. Which one maybe are we more familiar with? Which one might we want to think more about in a particular Advent season, or do they have to be intertwined? Those are questions we can continue to explore. But I think at a very basic level, this definition gives us kind of a good grounding as to what Advent is. It is also important to note, and we'll move into the research function in just a minute. It's also important to note this part of the definition, a season of the church year. Now, we've got a really broad base of users with lots of different denominational backgrounds, different faith commitments, different religious traditions. And so your mileage may vary in terms of what level of observance of Advent you are familiar with. Certainly, there are some worshiping traditions, Christian ones in particular, where once Thanksgiving is over, the Christmas tree goes up in the sanctuary. There may be others where that is considered nearly sacrilegious, and so you've got Advent candles and Merry Christmas isn't said until actual Christmas, and of course there's somewhere in between. But there are certainly enough traditions, I think, where Advent is unfamiliar, that it's worth exploring this. What are some of the riches that we can mine from observing this season, however we do it, Christmas tree in your sanctuary or not? Let's talk about the research function in accordance and go further with this, because I've tried to raise some questions, maybe even some tensions with Advent, and how do we start to think through these more? And what else do people say about Advent? And we might also wonder, this thing about the church calendar, that's historical. So when did it start? How have Christians been thinking through Christ's first coming and second coming for 2,000 years? The research function is going to help us with that. So I'll shift now to that. If you've got questions or comments just about this initial definition here, feel free to put them into the questions box. But let's move into the research feature now. I want to start here by noting I hyperlinked in your handout to this webinar that I just taught recently. I'll show you what this link looks like when you open it. If I go to a new web browser, it's not copying correctly. Let's try again. All right, well, anyway, if you go to that link, yeah, it's not working for me for whatever reason. If you go to that link, it will take you to the webinars section, which I can show you this way actually, under Help, Webinars. Western Hemisphere friendly, that would be the ones that I lead. And the direct link is in your handout, but I just led a session on the research function in accordance. So you can go a lot further with that than we're about to do now. You'll find it in here. Actually, it's right here, 9 days ago. But let's do a basic overview, because this is the next thing I would do with Advent or any other topic. And you know, Advent breaks out into lots of related topics. Even here, you can see in the Pocket Dictionary, salvation, the parousia, the idea of the incarnation, even Jesus as a child, Jesus as human, Jesus as divine. There's lots here. So eventually, I'm going to want to do something more robust than just my pocket dictionaries. And we can get to the research feature a few different ways. I'll show you two. One is you've already got this open, so you can just select the word you want to search. So I've double clicked on Advent to select it. You see the kind of faint green highlighting behind there. Now I'm going to right click, and that will bring up this contextual menu. And research is one of the options here. And I can research the word Advent now in all of these different possible categories. We went into these in great detail in the research webinar. I'm just going to search all for now, because why not? We can comb our way through the different results. And so what I've got now, let me make my screen prioritize this a little bit more. What I've just done is I've searched the word Advent in this research, which some versions ago used to be called search all, and that's what it is. It's searching all of your everything in accordance, or you can subdivide it to just search your texts or your tools. So that roughly splits out into primary and secondary sources, all of these subcategories. No reason not to search all. And it turns out that there are some primary texts that have the word Advent, but conspicuously absent in my primary texts is the Bible. So that word, at least in the translations that I have, and I have many, that word is not present as such. Now, that doesn't mean the concept is not present. We could say the same thing about Trinity. The word Trinity is nowhere in the Bible. The concept generally believed to be everywhere, although not everyone would fully agree with that. But I do have it in the Apostolic Fathers. So this is interesting to see here. I mean, if my question is when is Advent first used, I've got some options here to make my way through. Now, this is all translation, so I want to think about original languages and kind of work my way backwards. But for now, let's jump ahead to the dictionaries, because that might be the most relevant option here. In fact, I could even just select dictionaries and search Advent only in the dictionaries. So I can go down through my content sidebar here until I find something that looks interesting. Here is Dictionary of Theological Terms. This is a different resource. I can show you. This is the Westminster Dictionary of Theological Terms, and very similar, Latin adventus, or coming. And it says, in reference to Christ, the first advent is his incarnation, semicolon, the second is his future second coming. I like this definition a little better than the first one, just because it holds both of those advents together. And it says, much like we already saw in our other dictionary, also used for the first season of the Christian year in which the coming of Jesus Christ is anticipated. I don't have a notes tool or document open now. If I did, I might just sort of make a note to myself, first season of the Christian year, what's that about? And kind of track that as I study. It turns out that the new church year, the new calendar year, it begins with Advent. So it's not the same as our January through December calendar, but I might wonder about that and wonder about the history. So that's worth a note. Lots of stuff is going to come up here, depending on what dictionaries you have. Other dictionaries will have much longer entries. Like here's the Evangelical Dictionary of Theology, which is already a little bit longer. But when I get into something like Anchor Yale Bible Dictionary, I might have more. Holman, yeah, a lot of these are short. So you can make your way through the dictionaries. Now, we talk about this more in the research webinar, but I am, for now, just looking at entries if I scroll further down and look at something like English content, I'm going to see not just where Advent occurs as a dictionary entry, but where it occurs anywhere in the dictionary. That's like in print, instead of just looking up Advent under A, now you also go to the index and look up Advent, and you see, 50 different references. So you could go through, I mean, you can see here, I have a lot of resources where the word Advent comes up. Now, this is a funny word because it is used in other settings that don't have anything to do with Jesus's coming or the church calendar, like this with the advent of modern hermeneutics, however, et cetera, et cetera. That's not talking about Advent per se. So we need to manually go through these results, but we certainly can do that. So with the research search, whether you search all or subdivide into dictionaries, you've got some options there. And I would also just note that as a way of exploring Advent, especially because, for example, the word Advent doesn't occur in the Bible, I know there are passages about the first coming and the second coming, so I might need to think, if I'm doing a topical search, a little more broadly, which is one reason I wanted to start with the very simple dictionary definition. There are other words I can search in my research feature that will get me to Advent-related texts and tools, and some of them are in here. Coming, arrival, even the word earth or incarnation is not listed here, but certainly that would be a word to search. Parousia would be another one. I could even search Adventus and see is this showing up in any, certainly the Latin Vulgate it will show, but yeah, here's Dictionary of Latin and Greek Theological Terms. So that opened up something else to me that I've got here, and this is actually a lengthier article than anything we've seen. So just kind of think through what are some other words that I might search here. Of course, incarnation being such a major theological topic, even with a very small library, you will find no shortage of entries on that. And we could do the same with parousia for the second coming, or we could even search the phrase second coming. So this is not science as much as it is a little bit of art, but I think if you're going to take this approach, which is one of several we're exploring today, certainly start with searching the word Advent, but from there, you might think about some other terms to search for. This will also pretty quickly take you into some relevant passages, so it won't be very long, or you may know this already off the top of your head before you're in Luke 2. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. How do we study a Bible passage that has to do with the first coming or the second coming in particular? All right, let me just pause there. That's kind of a very that's a brief overview of the research feature, which, as I say, the webinar is linked here in the handout, and just maybe thinking through some different things. You might even just do Jesus child or something like that and see what comes up. So you can experiment with this and see what comes up. But I'll stop there and see what questions or comments folks have. Next, we'll move on to want to share some particular Advent resources that are available in accordance. And then from there, we'll move into studying Bible passages. So what comments or questions do folks have? And if none, we can just kind of pause for a moment and let this settle in. All right, let's talk about these Advent resources that are in accordance. And a way to find this, by the way, is you could just go to a new web browser in Accordance or accordancebible.com and type in the word Advent, and you'll see here, got Feasting on the Word Advent Companion. I'll talk about that. We've got a Walter Brueggemann set of devotions. I'll talk about that. These, by the way, both on sale. Life Guides Advent Bundle. I'm not sure that I have that to show you. That's relatively new. And this actually is great because it's going to take you right into some Bible passages. And there's more here. You can see, again, this word Advent is used flexibly, so you'll get biblical hermeneutics, an Adventist approach. So like Seventh-day Adventist, that's not necessarily what we're talking about, but you'll see some options here. Not a whole lot, but at least a handful. But let's talk about this feasting on the word Advent companion. And I've put the publisher's description here in the handout. So the hyperlink takes you to it in the Accordance store, and then here's the description. We talked about Advent as being part of the church calendar, and so you will have in the Sundays of Advent, you will have prescribed passages from what's called the lectionary, and some of your traditions use that, some maybe don't. Maybe it's something you're familiar with. In fact, even that, I would go to the research search if you wanted to see what's in accordance on lectionary. Here's another way to do research. There's a little shortcut up here in the toolbar. So you can probably find a good definition there. Here's a short one. It's a collection of selected scriptural readings used in worship and arranged according to the liturgical year. So there is an Advent lectionary that various mainline denominations will use. You'll find one in the Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church, some overlap, some differences. But the Feasting on the Word series is kind of built around this 3-year Sunday lectionary, which Advent being the first season, then there's Christmas, then Epiphany, you've got Ordinary Time, you've got Lent, you've got Easter. I did that a little bit out of order, but this one focuses in on Advent in particular, and it uses not just the lectionary readings, but it goes beyond that, and it's got services that are designed according to different themes, and it's got something for Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, as well as midweek services that has something on John the Baptist. All right, well, let's open up the resource, and I can show you that here. All right, so here are the contents. You can see here there are complete services. Now, this is especially helpful if you are a worship service planner, or if you are a pastor or have some role here, then these midweek services. And just to look at one of these, we're coming up on the second Sunday of Advent now. And so you'll find some readings that may be familiar for those of you who have done different lectionary readings for Advent. Here's Malachi, for example. I'm sending my messenger to prepare the way before me, and the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple, and so on. Hyperlinked here so that you can open it up as a separate window, and you can study the passage from there. We'll get into that in a bit. But then a whole order of worship here, lighting of the Advent candles. I have used these before with attribution. Great stuff here. Prayer of confession, declaration of forgiveness. So you could think of this as kind of Advent, I was going to say applied, but it's really meant to be a kind of Godward observance of Advent. So not just the theoretical, theological, but how do we actually kind of put that into practice and let it shape our worship. So you can see here, there's a whole service here. This also goes a little bit farther than that. It even has a proposed children's sermon, and then some sermon helps. Some of this is drawn from the Feasting on the Word, like the main resources. So you'll see this, if you know that resource, this might be familiar to you. With a lectionary passage, there's a theological perspective, there's a pastoral perspective, exegetical perspective, and homiletical perspective. Now there's overlap to all of these, but the idea is, how do we look at this particular Advent passage for this particular Sunday from a theological standpoint? So if we've got the judgment mentioned, what's the theology of judgment? How do we think about that? Judgment, has a lot of negative connotations, can have positive connotations too. How do we kind of wrestle through that from a biblical theological standpoint? There's the pastoral perspective. Where is the God of justice, for example, would be a kind of pastoral question. Yes, that's theological and It's a question that folks, we feel it deep in our bones. The psalmists did, the prophets did, and that's still true today. Exegetical perspective, that's going to be a little bit more like the kind of stuff we might do in our translation notes webinars. So some historical background, how does Malachi write? What are his priorities? What kind of language does he use? And then homiletical perspective, which is specifically about, okay, grounded in theology and exegesis and with some pastoral sensitivity, how then might we preach this passage? That's the homiletical perspective. So this is for Malachi. There's one for Matthew. Maybe you want to preach not on Malachi, but on Matthew. And you can see here already kind of this dual nature of Advent, that Malachi is looking ahead to the first coming, and Matthew is also looking ahead to another coming, the second coming, about that day and hour no one knows. And if you're, just to get very practical, if you're preaching a sermon or planning a worship service, that is a decision of focus to make. Do we do both? And I mean, oftentimes the answer is yes for Advent. It's a both and. But you've got it kind of split out into different passages here with this full order of worship. That's the complete services. There's midweek services, which is similar to this, and you could even kind of mix and match here if you were building a service. There's also a service of hope and healing here, which is wanting to be sensitive to the idea that, I don't know if you've heard of this longest night service. Some churches will do this in Advent, keeping in mind, for one thing, the longest night is during Advent, the winter solstice, literally the longest night, but also keeping in mind that even while people are, real life example for today, going to the post office and hearing All I Want for Christmas Is You and Sleigh Bells Ring and things like that, there's real pain that people experience. And maybe this kind of so-called Christmas spirit, or at least the consumeristic version of it, maybe that's not really hitting with people. Maybe it's actually kind of offensive because they're not being seen in their pain. And so this service of hope and healing and this idea of the longest night is asking the question, drawing on the church's deep well of resources and theological and biblical and liturgical traditions, especially with Advent in mind. How can we offer a space for folks who are grieving to kind of invite God's presence and to sit together and to mourn and to worship and all the things you hope a great worship service would do, but specifically with the idea of hope and healing and acknowledging, it says here, grief, depression, or illness. And Advent has great resources for that. I think about the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. So that's in this as well. I'll stop there. That's a lot on one resource, but I think you can probably tell that I really appreciate this particular resource and have made good use of it over the years. Let me just pause there and see if folks have questions or comments about the Feasting on the Word Advent Companion. We'll do the next two together as one in just a moment. All right. So this is a little bit more public facing, although certainly you could make use of any of these resources individually, but it really is meant to. I mean, you can see here, Advent comes every year, and it's got church leaders in mind in particular. So Feasting on the Word, again, it can be very much used individually, but it's more with kind of a corporate worshiping community setting in mind. By contrast, these next two resources are devotional. And Advent is short enough. I mean, we've just got, the 4 Sundays of Advent leading up to Christmas. It's short enough that some folks might kind of take on an Advent practice. And so, maybe that practice is reading guided devotions, or maybe this is part of your research for a sermon or a Bible study. Either way, here are two to highlight. One is Bonhoeffer, God is in the Manger, Reflections on Advent and Christmas. So I'll just close all of these. I can get here easily by typing in Bonhoeffer. Here's the cover. So we've got the Christmas flowers here. So that cover is more Christmassy than Adventy. But we can go to the contents here. And so actually this is not just Advent, it's Advent and Christmas, but this is thematically arranged. So Advent week 1 is grouped, and this is grouped from Bonhoeffer's different writings. Waiting, mystery. And when you think about mystery, what's the mystery in Advent? Well, we saw in that Matthew passage, no one knows the hour. I mean, talk about a mystery. Redemption, that has to do with the work of salvation. Incarnation in particular, and then the 12 days of Christmas. Your content sidebar will allow you to expand and collapse the different triangles, and just to kind of get a sense here of the length. It's not terribly long for each day, so easy to read it reflectively and even kind of do a deep reading of it if you want to. So it will say here, you've got a heading, the Advent season is a season of waiting, so this will talk about that. Bonhoeffer, right from the beginning, kind of holds together both Advents. Christ is knocking, Revelation 3:20, which hovering over, I can see that full verse in my instant details. It's still not Christmas, but it's also still not the great last Advent, the last coming of Christ. Through all the Advents of our life that we celebrate runs the longing for the last Advent when the word will be, see, I am making all things new. You can hover over that, and here is Revelation 21:5. And then you've got a particular excerpt here with a note from where it comes from. If you're curious more about the source of all of these writings and how it was compiled, the editor's preface will speak to that. But here Bonhoeffer opens up an interesting angle for us. It's actually really interesting to see. He's not talking about the second coming or the second advent, but the last advent, the last coming. The idea there being, as I've heard folks in worshiping communities say, there are comings, advents of Christ even now. So if you want to kind of use colloquial devotional language, like where did you see Jesus today? And some people may not use that kind of language, that may resonate with others, but the idea of Christ's presence in the world now, that would be kind of a whole series of advents. And whatever you think about that, Bonhoeffer clearly believes that. And so he, interestingly, the second advent, he doesn't even call it that here, it's the last advent. So there's lots here that I think will be useful devotionally, and may even find its way into some kind of corporate setting. I put the publisher description here, noting too, these are short excerpts from his letters and his Christmas sermons. So I don't think, and I haven't looked at this closely enough to know, but I don't think you're going to get much here from his major works. Certainly you could look through this, but I don't think, in fact, you could even, like, you could see if the word ethics is there for his ethics, and it's not. So it's not like it's quoting his major work. So it's specifically letters and sermons, which I think gives it kind of a more of a short, punchy, devotional, concise kind of feel. And Brueggemann is similar. This is Devotions for Advent. Celebrating Abundance, Devotions for Advent by Brueggemann. So I can search that by title or by author. And you'll see here, this is Advent and some prayers for Christmas as well. And this is similar. I don't know exactly. Here's the compiler's note. You could look at this. In the prayers, yeah, I'm not sure what exactly the source material is. That may be noted here more. But anyway, you've got Brueggemann writing about Advent and Christmas. Now, Brueggemann, here, I'll just note the description here. He is big. I mean, this is kind of part and parcel of his, his approach, that he talks a lot about scarcity and abundance throughout his writing. And he does that. He kind of traces that through biblical narrative. The classic example of this would be the manna and the quail, and that there was abundance of each, but there was this scarcity mindset among the people who would either let it rot because they didn't gather enough, or would gather too much. They would gather in advance when Yahweh had specifically told them not to. So that's just one example, and he talks about things like that. But even today, this idea of scarcity and abundance. So those themes will kind of make its way through here. And I love this line from the publisher's description: the arrival of the Messiah is true abundance disguised by the impression of scarcity. So you might even just go, and kind of wonder about that. Well, let's just search all English for scarcity, because I want to see how he talks about that. So we've got actually only 3 hits. That's interesting, but there's a relevant passage here, a relevant devotion that you might check out. So Brueggemann is great. This gives you an idea of his approach. And as with Bonhoeffer, and as with any tool, if there are something like daily reflections on the scriptures, you'll get them quoted or cited, but you can also hover over the reference and see it in your instant details, or click it open into a new zone where you can study it in more detail. I will just make one more recommendation. We'll do questions, and then we'll spend the rest of the time talking about studying Advent-themed Bible passages. This is unfortunately not in accordance, but Fleming Rutledge's book Advent is, I mean, she's just great as a preacher and as a writer, as a theologian. So she's, and she really, she says here, a season celebrating at once Christ's incarnation and his second coming, and she masterfully unfolds the ethical and future-oriented significance of Advent for the church. I think she keeps both comings in mind, but I have been surprised to see how second coming oriented she is, to the point, and I'd be hard pressed to find an exact quote on this, but to the point where she almost says Advent is more about the second coming than the first. I don't want to misrepresent her, but she certainly, in terms of my own personal experience, I've thought of Advent as first coming only. She has really kind of redirected that thinking for me. So this book, which you can find it in print, I've just linked to the publisher's page here. That book is great, very thick. There's a lot to it. So that's something I can recommend as well. And she writes as a preacher. She is an Episcopal priest. She is a theologian. And so you get this kind of wonderful blend of the academic and the devotional all at the same time. So I think in terms of who's the target audience, probably anybody and everybody. It can be a little dense at times, but she's also got a very pastoral heart and it's very practical. So this is a really good resource. So those are 4 Advent resources, 3 of them in accordance. One, Feasting on the Word, which I think just does a great job with kind of helping with corporate observance and participation in Advent, how to really worship in this kind of Advent spirit with these 2 Advents in mind, and then all the in-between Advents. Where is Christ at work now? I think, or even thinking of the church as the body of Christ. Bonhoeffer, Brueggemann, and then Rutledge. Those are ones that I found useful for the Advent season. We use the rest of the time here studying Advent-themed Bible passages, but what comments or questions do folks have before we do that? All right, let's talk about some Bible passages for Advent that we might study. This resource here, lectionary.library.vanderbilt.edu, that's hyperlinked in your handout. And I will also just put it in the chat if you want some quick access to it. And we kind of looked at this already with the Feasting on the Word companion, but this will take you, and now interestingly, and this is coded in a very neat way. When you go to the home page, it automatically shows you the current week's readings, which I think is really cool. If you want to see like all of the church calendar all at once, you can click your way around and find that, or even here readings for the season. You could click on that and see Advent readings. But just to go back, it will always take you just at that default homepage to the week's readings. So you know now, if you didn't already, that this Sunday, December 8th, 2024, is the second Sunday of Advent. And here are the prescribed readings according to this revised common lectionary, which probably somewhere in the FAQ is going to have a who's behind the revised common lectionary, what traditions, how did they decide, and that's a whole interesting thing too. So you've got the readings here in the accordance setup. There's going to be this hyperlinked option here, or this kind of automatic hyperlinking, where if you hover over a Bible reference in your web browser, so it's a web browser because this is a web page, but if you hover over it, you'll also see it in your instant details and as a popover here, which I think is a function of the website. And you can click it and it clicks open in accordance. So I really like this resource. It's a web-based resource and it works great just as a web browser. But when you open it as Accordance's web browser, it can take you right to a given passage. So I might click open Luke 3, 1 through 6, all flesh shall see the salvation of God. I might click open Malachi. There's Malachi again. So we'll look at some of these in just a moment. Let me just also point out this readings for the season. Click on that, Advent. And here you can see all four Advent readings for year C. This is year C. And that one dictionary mentioned that the church year calendar starts with Advent. So this is the beginning of year C. It's a 3-year cycle, A, B, and C. We're just now on year C. And here are the readings. And I mention that because there's Advent year A and year B readings. So if you're thinking, well, where is, I don't know, pick your Advent passage you're expecting to see. If it's not here, it's probably in one of the other years. All right, let's take one of these passages. I might take Isaiah 12, 2 through 6. And click on that. All right. So whether I open it up that way, or maybe I just open up a Bible text this way, it's got the same thing here. I'm in a Bible passage. We'll open it up this way. All right, I'm in a Bible passage. I just lost it. Isaiah, oops, I opened up the wrong one. Bear with me. All right, Isaiah 12. So this is the Bible passage that I'm going to look at for Advent. Maybe we just take these couple of verses, these few verses. Surely God is my salvation. More on salvation here. Shout aloud and sing for joy, O royal Zion, for great in your midst is the Holy One of Israel. So if I decide that I'm going to connect this to Advent, or it's a reading in the service or something I'm going to preach on, I've got it open as a Bible text here. And my next step now to begin to research it is going to be to get my info pane open, which I access from Add Parallel here. And as with the research feature, I've just recently led a webinar on the info pane. So what we're about to do is the kind of short applied version, but here is a full hour on it, hyperlinked in your handout if you want to take a look at that. But once I've got my passage selected anywhere from the lectionary or something Advent themed, or maybe I did it on my own, or maybe I think Advent and that makes me think incarnation and that makes me think Luke 2, and what I really want to research is the story of Jesus's birth, whatever it is. The info pane will allow you quick access on a verse-by-verse basis to resources that you have in your library. So this idea, surely God is my salvation. He has become my salvation. That word is mentioned a lot here. This would warrant a word study. Now I can do that from the original language. If I know Hebrew, that's a little easier. Even if I don't, I've got Hebrew showing in the instant details. I can also look at my study Bibles and my commentaries. I can hover over any of these for a preview. This one I'm going to Command click open into a new zone. Control click is what I would do on Windows. So here we've got Oswalt noting already, and this goes back to verse 1, the frequently repeated phrase, in that day. This in that day phrase comes up a lot, and it has to do with something to either be hoped for or to be dreaded, or maybe both, depending on who you are and what side of the day that you're on. But anyway, Oswalt notes all that, and this is kind of eschatological, or at least looking forward language that Advent is so full of. And so as we saw in that Feasting on the Word Advent Companion worship service, you interestingly can, maybe your theme is looking ahead, but you're looking ahead from the vantage point of Malachi to the first coming, and you're looking ahead from the vantage point of Jesus in his first coming to the second coming, when he's talking about it in Matthew. And the phrase in that day will help you do that, which raises all kinds of questions. Well, when is that day? How soon is soon? What ought we to do in the meantime? But anyway, even as we think through those questions, we've got this sure declaration, surely God is my salvation, which if I were preaching this passage, I might kind of ask and surface the question of when is that day, specifically when Jesus comes again. But I might also anchor to a certain hope, just as the passage does. And so your info pane is going to help you with this. It's going to go verse by verse through your different resources. This Oswalt Isaiah commentary is really good. I've made great use of that before. And this will talk about, it may not use the word Advent, but it probably will make some sort of reference to it at some point. As I go through my different commentaries, one of the ones that will show up here is Feasting on the Word, if you have that. And I can just show you that just like the Advent Companion, here is Isaiah 12. Now here it's showing elsewhere in the lectionary. But you might just navigate through that and see what it has to say about Isaiah 12, either there or from any of your other commentaries. So that's commentaries. I talked briefly about word studies. The study Bibles are really good here too. Let me jump ahead a verse. Here's another in that day. In verse 4, so I might look in particular to see if that phrase is treated in my commentaries. Study Bibles will give me kind of a more concise treatment. Here we have, for example, in the Orthodox Study Bible, compare this song of praise to the Song of Mary in Luke 1, so there's clearly an Advent connection there. I go into more detail in the info pane webinar about how to use this as a springboard for your studies. But I do just want to say, I probably short-circuited this a little bit just now. To the extent that you're able to do original language study first before you get into secondary sources, that's great to do. Or if you don't know the original languages, you might even, let's just skip ahead actually to the Magnificat. Here's Mary's Song of Praise. You might even just use your Add Parallel button to open up different parallel texts. And whether you know Greek or Hebrew or not, you could at least compare them. So for example, this idea, my soul magnifies the Lord. Here in the HCSB, we have my soul proclaims the greatness of the Lord. And you might wonder about that. Those are different enough translations that I might want to do some word study here. We've got glorifies the Lord. And you can use your parallel translations to help shed light on Greek and Hebrew, even if you don't know those particular languages. It's been a little while since I've offered a basic word study webinar, but in short, you could triple click any of these words. You see the cross highlighting that's happening here? This shows you, it's not word for word exact here, but it shows you magnifies, glorifies, same word, megaluno. I could triple click even from English, and that will take me into my default Greek lexicon. So if you have, I think even a basic collection or one of the lower level collections in accordance, you'll have a Greek lexicon of some kind. And so it's obviously easy to use it if you know Greek, but even if you don't, you might just consider under Amplify, you've got triple click defaults here that will allow you to set this all up. But what I've done here is I've triple clicked from English and I've gotten right into a Greek lexicon, which is allowing me, it's still kind of with a passage in mind, it's allowing me to do research in the original language and to see, well, here's how this Greek lexicon defines megaluno. Maybe this will shed some light on why 3 different translations that I honestly just sort of opened somewhat at random, why they have different translations. You've got magnify, you've got proclaim the greatness of, which is what magnify means, and you've got glorify. Now, those really are so close in meaning, it's not something I would look at and sort of worry about, you know, are they looking at a different text? No, they're all looking at the same Greek word, it's just different translation. But reading this dictionary definition helps me understand that. Here's the full definition. Actually, you've got 2 definitions: to cause to be large, or to cause to be held in greater esteem through praise or deeds. And then you've got these synonyms: exalt, glorify, magnify, speak highly of. These in bold and italics in this particular lexicon in BDAG are translation equivalents. So what they're saying in this lexicon is megaluno means, in Luke 146, to cause to be held in greater esteem through praise or deeds. And here are some ways you could translate it. Those are in italics. Exalt, and I'm sure some translation has that. Glorify, magnify, speak highly of, proclaim the greatness of. So seeing it in this way helps us to understand, you know, language is not a decoder ring. It's not one-to-one, like every Greek word has one and only one translation equivalent in every instance. It's just, language just doesn't work that way. And seeing BDAG helps us with that, and helps us to understand why we've got different translations here. So that's one tool I would use. I'm doing this on Luke 1, but we might have done that for the word salvation in Isaiah 12. So if we go back to that, I doubt we're going to have as much variation in translation. You might get deliverance in some places, but if I triple click this, now that knew, even though I was triple clicking from English, just like in Luke, that knew that it has underlying Hebrew. Accordance knew that. So it took me to my Hebrew dictionary. And here we've got help, salvation, not a whole lot of translation options here. Maybe this one's a little bit of an easier one, but you could do this with any of these words, even on that day. How does the word day used, and does that help me to know what that day might be? Well, the answer is no, but it helps me to see how that word is used, and here's specifically something about the day of Yahweh. So whether it is the info pane for your commentaries and study Bibles, or this kind of word study, once you've got a particular passage in view, there are different ways to go deeper in research with it. And I point you here to the InfoPane webinar. We've got word study webinars that are recorded there, and then all the things that you would do to study a passage you could do. But the way to get there, maybe you already have a passage in mind, or you could go to this lectionary website and see what is something I might want to study to understand Advent. Great to go through these resources and dictionaries and so on, but you know, maybe even better to look at a passage firsthand and see what you can find. Let me just get back to this lectionary page. All right, actually, here's the full, I clicked on, I don't know what I clicked on. Yeah, resources colors. This gives you the full church calendar if you're interested. Actually, interesting too, I didn't realize there's different colors for different traditions, but you've got Advent, Christmas, Epiphany, Ordinary Time, Lent, and then Easter, Pentecost. There's all kinds of stuff here. But just back to the Advent part here, right here, view all Advent dates. That might be your starting point for which passage do you want to look at. And again, you don't have to wait for year A or year B to roll around. You can navigate right to those years on this website, and that will allow you to see, like, what are the Advent passages for the other years. All right, so just to recap, and I welcome comments or questions as we think about wrapping up here. We've talked initially about what Advent is. We've spent some time looking at the research search in accordance and how you can use that for the word Advent, but also other related terms. I've highlighted some Advent resources, 3 of which are in accordance. One of which, Feasting on the Word Advent Companion, is probably for more corporate settings, 2 of which are more personal devotional. And then this Fleming Rutledge Advent book. This is going to go much deeper, I think, than these other ones into the history of Advent, which you probably have a dictionary somewhere in your library anyway that can speak to that. But you may wonder, when did the church start observing Advent, and has the shape of that observation changed over the years? That's something she talks about. And then finally, we talked about studying Advent-themed Bible passages in accordance. That's what I've got. I'd love to hear comments or questions you've got. If you want to put them in the questions box, you can also, if you would rather ask it out loud, you can raise your virtual hand, which I will see, and then I can unmute you and you can ask it that way. I will go ahead and end the recording though as we move into questions. So if you are watching the recording, again, you can email me at abramkj@accordancebible.com for this handout or any other questions or comments you've got.